you don't want to build a 2023 company in 2026. You don't want to build a 2024 company in 2026. You got to be aware of what not just your competition directly is doing, but the state of the overall AI, not exactly economy, but the AI sphere is doing. To that effect, too, people's expectations of SaaS is changing significantly. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Build and Breakthrough podcast, where we celebrate founders' successes and struggles. Today, I have Jing Deng, a former coworker of mine at Syndoso, a product professional for decades, as well as a B2B product advisor, and the founder of Sparkl One. Jing, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Jing, a product passionate, and I like building things that adds value to people's life and work.
Do you also want to tell us a little bit about Sparkl One?
Yeah, absolutely. Sparkl One is a all-in-one solution that we built aiming to help founders and early startups to easily understand their user behaviors and be able to repeat that process without subscribing to, deep pocket data warehouse, BI tool, data transformation. You have everything in one solution, and of course, it's powered and assisted by AI, so you don't have to learn everything from scratch.
Yeah, so for viewership, I wanted to have Jane come on, first of all, as a founder, but second of all, because with her deep product expertise, which I saw a ton in Syndoso, I really wanted to have a discussion about product and kind of like what is product? Why does product matter? So, Jing, what does product mean to you?
Product means it's a function that is a glue, is a catalyst, it is a direction finder for solving a problem.
I love that specific verbiage of direction too, because in a lot of the work that I'm doing, engineering often supplies significant speed, but without product doing that directing, things are significantly more difficult. It's very easy for engineers to wander off into the distance and work on things that may be exciting but may not matter. What do you have to say in terms of products connect with engineering in this case?
Thinking it is an overstatement of product being like that helpful, but for sure, I think it's a good function to keep everyone on track, especially towards the common shared goal and objective. And that is actually more and more important, even now with the vibe coding so popular and everyone becomes a builder. And even for myself, I remember when Cursor came out first, I found myself building 5 different products at the same time,
Really?
which is a very easy habit to get into, but not the best practice.
So tell me a little bit more about that. So I assume Sparkle One was one of the 5 products. How did you go about going from kind of I guess this is kind of an exploration type activity originally that kind of branched out and then focused back in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the cost of starting something that kind of like messed up people's thinking process. It doesn't matter what tools you have, what resources you have, eventually finding the direction and finding the thing that you want to focus your energy on is what you need to do, right? You want to think about the ROI of your time, your team's time, and all your rare resources. So yes, you can absolutely say a couple words and start projects in any of the vibe coding tool, I mean, and see a sort of a prototype showing up. But as human being, we still only have limited time. So like decide what to focus on is ultimately what we did. Eventually, we focused most of the energy on Sparkl.
So what was that process like though? What caused you to consolidate on that one versus the other alternatives?
Yeah, I think there are quite a few frameworks that I would recommend folks to use. Essentially, you're thinking about the idea's value and the relevance and the skill match that you have between your experience, your team, and the idea itself. So for us, what we evaluated was, well, first of all, how much do we know about this? Like myself as a product leader, I suffered, my team suffered. I pushed my team to do all kinds of things around understanding the user behaviors to help us guide the product direction much, much better. has not always been a very smooth process. So I know the pain exists and I understand the value of the output of that effort. And then we thought about, okay, what technologies can we use? What tools do we have, right? What competitions are out there? And then is, okay, what is the market demand? Because sometimes what you think you need or what you think the market needs is not necessarily what the market actually is looking for. So there's always that awareness gap, and sometimes it's like the timing gap. And then from there is really just like, okay, I have all my ideas assessed in that way, and I have a ranking. And then Sparkl won, and that's how we chose Sparkl.
Okay, that makes sense. Can you kind of shade in for me in terms of these other ideas too? Like, what was the most out of band idea of the five?
Hmm. Well, I think the ideas are really just all over the spectrum. There was an idea that completely coming out of my personal interest. I have kids, I want to raise them with financial awareness. And so I was shopping around in the app store looking for an application that just simply give me a sort of like a record keeping and the smartness to manage the allowances I give to them with the
Hmm.
login and all that. I just couldn't find something that's like simple enough and just easy to use. So one of those projects was, why don't I just build an app myself? Like I actually did. I pretty much finished the application. And eventually I paused on it because later on I found out it is really just like a very small portion of parents who wanted it, like myself. The market didn't really want that type of application. A lot of the parents were more interested in, oh, I need a tracker of the chores and I need to issue the allowance based on the chores completion, which is actually usually advised against by the professional educators. Yeah, I found that fascinating, but you don't really fight the markets, right? The users are ready when they are. Considering like the educational cost and just like a people's habit of doing things, decided not to continue with that.
That's pretty interesting because that is kind of the quintessential problem where, it of course makes sense to build for a problem that you have, but it's not always the case that you and your kind of customer persona actually represents that big of a market. It may be that you're
Mm-hmm.
unique or at least rare in some capacity. So you may be identifying a legitimate market opportunity, you may be identifying a legitimate pain point, but also doesn't necessarily mean that you can build a scalable business off of that. And it certainly doesn't necessarily mean, even if you can build a scalable business off of it, that you can go after venture capital funding for that particular sector of the
Mm-hmm.
market. There's a number of situations where that's not the case. So I guess on that note, since we've been talking about AI a little bit here, for you as a founder, I mean, obviously you just said that you used AI to generate these five applications. How has your AI usage evolved over the past several years?
My AI usage, of course, started with just chatting and researching information collection. So ChatGPT was my go-to tool. And then when vibe coding came out, I became a heavy user of Cursor. I still use it because it works for me. I'm not an engineer by nature, so living in terminal is just like scary to me to some extent. So I like the UI of the Cursor. And then my AI usage has shifted over time after I'm learning more and more about AI's behavior and just like going through some of the struggles in using it. So from like having a very high hope of like, oh, I expected to do everything. And now it's more like, yes, I understand there are limitations. And it's like any other tool. You will only be able to maximize your benefits out of it after understanding what it can do, what it cannot do, what is best at, what is bad at. So it has becoming more of like, okay, I understand what AI can do, so I delegate things to it. And I know it make mistakes this way, so I always double check this part of the work it does. So I think my relationship with all the AI tools has stabilized over the past couple of years.
Interesting. You also mentioned that you have a team. How big is your team, and has your AI usage affected how you interact with the other members of your team?
It doesn't really impact how I interact with other members of my team. Our team is relatively small. We have fewer than 5 people, and we still communicate exactly the way we used to because we believe that a human to human communication is very important. And certain
Very
times it's
true.
the talk, it's the discussion that inspires more ideas or reflection on things. So my team members are actively using AI for the responsibilities they're taking. And we all share this common understanding is it is a tool, it is an assistant. We still have to own our work. We still need to understand and design what we're going to do.
That makes a lot of sense. So, would you say that to the point about direction earlier, your AI usage overall is helping you with that direction aspect, or is it more predominantly just focused on output and speed at this point?
I'd say it helped with both. So I'll go backwards from the output perspective. It definitely helped us with our development speed and productivity. One example from my side is historically, if we're going to change sort of like the UI and all other things, the process would be I create a Jira ticket, I create the design, I do the screenshot or the file sharing the Jira ticket and assign to the engineer, and engineer does it, send it back to me in like staging or test environment. I verify, and then we go through the release and verify again. So now the process has more become. I think this comes back to like understanding what AI is good at and how you want to use it. Is whenever there are UI changes, I do take the lead now. I still, for the best record keeping, I do create all the Jira or GitHub tickets, and I start the PR using Cursor. And then I submit my PR after verifying on my local environment. Of course, that used help from my engineering team to help me set up, but they review my code and then it can go through the release process. So that cut a couple back and forth steps, and it just enabled me to um, iterate our UI UX much faster. And I think the other thing is it does help when it comes to research. Like I use it a lot when I find a potential competitor or partner to work with, instead of like directly going to their website and trying to consume all the information. I do use AI to give me a high level summary so I can make a decisions like, is this worth my time, or this is something that just looks relevant but actually not. But I do still always just go to the content or the site itself when I find something interesting and worth investment of my time. Because whatever the AI generate for you based on the question you ask. And before you see the full picture, you can only ask very generic questions based on your understanding. So you don't know what you don't know. But when you start reading the actual content itself, it could actually give you way more follow up questions than you originally had.
This is very interesting because this is, I've had a couple of other guests, Phil Thornton and Colin Simon, who have come on and have really reiterated the same sort of flow where UI UX changes, especially where there's visible side effects. It's a pattern that I've seen referred to as design engineering, where AI is used to kind of do an initial pass on design changes or UI elements. I don't think either of them are fully doing like, storybook, these sorts of things, but really accessible UI layers seems to be a really effective entry point for these sorts of flows. I also wanted to ask further down this line of questioning. That sounds like a pretty like I don't want to call it mainstream yet because AI adoption is way lower based on all the statistics that I've seen than everyone's talking about. But this seems like a flow that has really reputable ROI that I've seen. Have you experimented at all with like multi agents, kind of less human in the loop flows, or any of these more like quote unquote advanced AI workflows?
To be honest, no. I think it depends on the stage of your organization and your processes. I mean, given we're still in like early stage, we are experiencing and making changes almost like every day. So I'd say the only thing that's like kind of closer to what you described is more of on the go-to-market side. And because once you find a recipe that works, you try to do that. But like internally, I would say for all kinds of things, we have to stay very nimble and flexible. And therefore, the ROI of implementing multi-agent workflow for now is not going to justify the initial investment and the maintenance that we have to do along the way.
I think that makes a lot of sense, mainly because from what I've seen, those can be powerful, but also have significant downsides in terms of real upfront capital investment, in terms of
Exactly.
documentation, strong build outs to your test suite, a number of things along those lines. So, changing the topic a little bit, you and I have talked several times about some of the conversations that I've had with founders about onboarding specifically, not onboarding of engineers, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to be talking about in future podcasts, but onboarding of your customers into your application. Actually, a funny story for the viewers here. We were having a discussion about the onboarding experience for Jing in Riverside, which is what we're using to record this podcast, and how she had some difficulties in terms of just like the overall experience getting in here. Jing, do you want to like run us through just like we can just use that as case in point in terms of a quick discussion about onboarding, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think it's less of a struggle, it's more of a profession habit to some extent bad and good at the same time. It's like whenever I use a product, like I start thinking like, oh, if I were the product manager, how would I do this? Is this really gonna hurt some of the, the conversions? Like how would this change the customer's perception of the product up front? So when I tried to join today's call, which Hunter used Riverside for, the first thing is, of course, give permissions. That's normal. That's fine. And then I was asked to fill out a form, which feels more like a form that you would fill out when you schedule a meeting instead of you joining a meeting.
Yeah, that was
My immediate
surprising to me.
reaction, yeah, well, you have all the meeting information. Why do I need to fill in my name again? And like, there's an optional email address. I know that doesn't matter from the UX perspective. One more field, one more drop off. But I mean, that doesn't really apply here, I guess, because when you have a meeting scheduled, you are committed to the time. You are going to do it. So it's less critical than any of the other conversion funnels you would see on like UI, UX. But overall, it's just like I think there's an expectation, right? It's the Google Hangout and the Zoom or Teams expectation that you have that users are so used to. I click on this link. At most, it asks me for permission or enter my name, and now I'm supposed to be getting into the meeting. Whenever there's one extra step, they'll be like, "Why? Why is that?"
Yeah, I was really surprised by the fact that you had that form experience. I thought it was just going to kind of like Zoom does, just have you put your name in and let you in. But I guess they probably want to do some amount of data gathering information. We were
Mm-hmm.
also talking about product led growth earlier, and I'm sure some aspect of this is in terms of getting you in a funnel so that they can kind of smoothly move you into a product led growth like marketing funnel or something like that. Because
Maybe.
I'm probably a victim of product led growth to a certain extent here because I was investigating, and for everyone listening, you're going to hear me talk about product led growth all the time on this podcast, probably. So I'm very passionate about it. But product led growth is when the product itself has functions that expose other people to the product and provide opportunities for people using the product as kind of a third party, like Jing is a guest here, will
Right.
probably get some experience that suggests that she sign up for the free plan, gets moved down that funnel, and has an opportunity to learn more about the product. So I was exposed to this because I was interested in podcasts, and someone showed me this very briefly, and I was like, great, that could be perfect. Now I'm doing marketing for Riverside by doing a podcast, which is pretty cool. So I always recommend product-led growth. But back to the point of onboarding, one of the topics that comes up a lot is UX and clicks associated with that. I see a lot of
Mm-hmm.
founders doing one good example that I saw. A founder was worried, and I'm trying to remember the specific worry that he had, but he had a security related worry which caused him to have a modal pop up that had the user choose. I think he was worried about password security. He was worried about exposing a password form where someone could put in an email address and a password and submit it potentially rapidly. So he had a modal to where you had to choose either I'm here for the first time or I'm returning to log in, which then would send you to your onboarding flow or send you to your password entry form. And I talked to him and was like, yeah, don't do that. Like you got other solutions for your security problems here. Remove when people are trying to use your application, try to let them go and use your application. If you don't, they're potentially going to bounce, right? So how are you thinking about that? It is still the best way to think about these sort of onboarding experiences. I know there's also the aha moment, but that's kind of later on in the process.
Yeah, I think onboarding, when you think about it, there's a key thing we have to bring up is, especially for B2B, because that's where my past experience has been concentrated in, is the buyer is not necessarily the admin user you are training to onboard the tool. So like there's a huge gap that you have to be aware of, because throughout the sale process, right? You're talking about how this tool can help your business do this and that, and this is your ROI, and this is how we're gonna onboard. But once the sale process is done, then the tool itself is handed to people who are assigned to be the admin of the tool to help you onboard additional users within the organization. So that person has very limited context of your tool. And to some extent, they don't even have the same motivation to implement the tool. So then I would say put all the UX, UI aside. Obviously, that matters when it comes to the specific onboarding tasks and completion rate. You really need to do is align and motivate your onboarding target users with the whole sales process. Help them understand
Mhm.
why their organization bought this tool, and help them understand why this matters to them. You got to make them felt motivated to do this. And otherwise, it's really going to be like a hair pulling effort to like, oh, can you join this meeting, right? Can you use this? But you haven't logged in for a couple of days. What's going on? Everyone has a busy life. So for them, it's always a prioritization. Like, oh, do I want to spend time onboarding this tool?
So for founders to do that, kind of before that, they have to have an understanding of the different personas that are utilizing the platform, right? So I think in general, I don't want to fully say in general, but frequently I see a pattern of three different users. One being the like line users of the product that are directly in the application using it on a day-to-day basis. You have your admins who are configuring the application for those people, potentially doing some monitoring, but really operating the controls of the system, if you will. And third, the buyers, as you have articulated, they may or may not be using the application, but generally speaking, they're buying the application to see some form of ROI and therefore care most about some sort of analytics where they can see demonstration of ROI. They're the ones that are big consumers of like generalized team dashboards and often some other configurations associated with that. Does that match your thinking overall? Or are there other personas?
Well, I think those are the main three personas. There's something to note that is there's when you are dealing with larger organizations, there's like the fourth persona that could be involved in your sale process and implementation, which is IT. They are not
Of course.
necessarily the admin users, they're not going to be the line users, they are not really the buyer, the decision maker. However, for a larger organization, you do have to do things based on all the protocols they have in place, and that can significantly slow down or damage your onboarding.
Absolutely. That's really the party that cares the most about your enterprise auth features and your integrations with Okta and these sorts of things. Feature chains associated with that can really assist in terms of landing some of the larger deals. Well, Jing, I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have any questions for me?
I'm curious to learn from your experience advising the different startups, talking to the guests. How many of them are actually seeing pure AI based products are landing into business processes and
Mhm.
organizations? And how many really going back to it comes down to, do you solve a problem? Do you provide the value? And I'm actually seeing a lot of the traditional software is still surviving and thriving because they solve a problem. And they are going to have a little bit disadvantages, like if they don't integrate AI into their product, but it's not like the product itself is completely becoming obsolete. What do you
I
think?
definitely I definitely agree. I don't think SaaS is becoming obsolete at all whatsoever. I think the economics of build versus buy are changing somewhat. Interestingly enough, to the build versus buy, I think for startups in general, buy almost unequivocally man, I can't say the word, always makes sense because when you buy, you do have some upfront cost, but or rather, it's significantly less upfront cost. Your break even is generally speaking beyond the projected lifetime of a successful exit anyway. The interesting change that I've seen is that for enterprise companies, I think there's a real threat to selling to enterprise at the moment because larger enterprises potentially have enough technical talent that they can staff full on teams to rebuild SaaS solutions to save a buck because organizations are tar pits for the most part. If this particular engineering team is not really that productive anyway, but they completely tear out your spend on a SaaS solution, that can be a net positive for that particular enterprise org. So I think that we will see continued selling to SMB, but I think we're going to see interesting dynamics in the next couple of years where your typical SMB B2B SaaS company would ordinarily look to swim upstream in enterprise and won't be able to. And I think that will result in difficulty receiving VC funds for a lot of these companies because there's going to be headwinds to scaling to the level that they want to. That's going to be really interesting. I don't really want to prognosticate too much in terms of VCs because I know less about that space, but I know there's a number of VCs in my network that are a bit worried about really the investability of a lot of the startups that they're seeing overall. And on the note
Mm.
of investability too, you touched on something interesting, which is like product market fit in general for these AI startups. With the space moving so rapidly, I feel like there's a whole set of products that were probably positioned to be in product market fit, let's say in 2023, 2024, because everybody's like, you got to have like your support agent or your sales agent or what have you. But that now moving into 2026, there's like a very different agentic kind of expectation here, right? People have used these agents, people are becoming increasingly frustrated with a lot of these agents. So I think a lot of kind of just like agent focused startups are really struggling at the moment because overall there's kind of like a new paradigm that seems to be emerging. I'm talking to my personal view and what I'm seeing in really successful exciting products is that opinionated workflows is kind of the key here. Instead of just providing an agent that you can chat with, use the agent for more complex decision making behind the scenes, and instead have more of like a traditional SaaS look and feel and just use the agent to do magic for that. I mean, Riverside here is a great example of that. I don't know how this would be possible with AI previously. Like this takes care of a huge amount of the editing that I do automatically. Like the AI based transcription is very, very cool. Now, you really have to be careful about mixing and remixing some features to get that. But when you can do that, the experience is incredibly magical and it's opinionated, so you have an effective moat as well. Man, there's a lot more here, and I'm trying to remember all of the different things that I wanted to express here. But part of the key here is that if your company like you don't want to build a 2023 company in 2026. You don't want to build a 2024 company in 2026. You got to be aware of what not just your competition directly is doing, but the state of the overall AI, not exactly economy, but the AI sphere is doing. To that effect, too, people's expectations of SaaS is changing significantly. I see a lot of conversation about the more bleeding edge users about why do I have to log into the web page? Just give me an interface where I can send my OpenClaw to go interact with it. And I think it's a little bit early to go all in on that, but I do think that I think that's a very interesting direction for startups to be pointed. Not because of OpenClaw, but because I've always been bullish on really API first companies. And if you're a company that
Mm-hmm.
has really effective backend processes, your UI can be built on top of that as one particular opinionated interface. You can also
Right.
expose MCPs, APIs, etc., and potentially allow agents to build their own like agentic experience on top of that. Now, whether you want that or not, there's a lot of downsides to that. But that's probably the top area that I'm kind of watching at this point. Not just like user experience, but agent experience for some of these products.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to really stress, I think it's far from decided whether that matters or not, but it is an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great direction for all the companies to think about. Like you said, it's not a determined route, but it's definitely more of a like openness and capability, right? If a
Exactly.
agent can use your solution, then you have one more way to solve problems for people. Because essentially, it's coming down to it's just another interaction model because you can do the human way, which is UI UX. The old way is the direct integration with the API, and this other way is the agent. Could be through your API or the MCP, but it's like a halfway in between. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a must have, at least for the next couple years for most of the companies. Unless really what your product is serving people manually doing something that cannot
Of
be
course.
done by the agents. But yes.
Yes, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there too. One of the reasons why I like that investment is because there isn't really a serious downside to it. Like it's the quintessential like, are you just building a tool or are you building a platform, right? Building for multiple experiences positions you to scale in the platform direction anyway, which is always well, I shouldn't say always. I think it's generally more investable. It has the openness allows you to have other people build other experiences for you instead of you building everything yourself. So your overall development costs are lower, or at least theoretically lower. And the overall cost as well of investment in this is relatively cheap. I mean, APIs have been around a long time. You know, MCPs are different, but they're categorically kind of equidistant in terms of development time. So it's a really good way to just kind of, in my opinion, increase your odds for success at relatively low cost. And obviously, if you're not actually serving a customer and people are paying for your thing, maybe don't do that. Maybe focus on like the core like product market fit. But once you're looking at scaling plays, there's definitely worse avenues that you could explore.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting because when you interact with the product through UI UX, obviously you have that authentication, the UI layer that really protects you and kind of guardrail among different accounts. And I know for a lot of the early products, when they build the API capability, it's really just for between system communication. It will be interesting to really look at like how can you give access to agents with the similar sort of security and privacy control that you have for human users, but then the fast processing and the capabilities you would have for the old traditional APIs.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that develops. Well, Jing, do you want to plug your pluggables?
Cool. Thanks for having me today, Hunter. I'm really having a good time chatting about all those topics. For people who want to chat more with me, feel free to find me on LinkedIn and reach out. And for companies who are looking at ways to gain easy understanding of your user behaviors and some product analytics, check out Sparkl One. We're happy to help you achieve what you're trying to do and find the direction at minimum cost.
Well, Jing, thank you very much for coming on. This has been fantastic. I greatly appreciate your time. And for everyone, I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. I think this was great. And I hope all of you have a fantastic day. Peace.
Bye.